Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana and May, and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
we talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday.
So on today's episode, this is a topic that artists, something we definitely talk about with folks in person. And then we've covered this on some of the podcast episodes, but we figured it was time to do an update. But essentially, we want to discuss with you the importance of studio newsletters. But before we dive in, let's go over a few definitions. So there's mailing lists and newsletters, and sometimes they're used interchangeably. So mailing list is a list of names and email addresses of people who want to stay in touch with you and learn more about your art. So pre-internet days, a mailing list was essentially a list of physical addresses and contact information, almost like the yellow books, right? But each artist would have their own Rolodex type situation of people they wanted to stay in contact with.
Exactly. So then as a business owner, you have your mailing list, you have your list of contacts, and then what you do with it is send email newsletters. And so this is a way that you can stay in touch with your audience, with collectors, with future collectors, as a way to inform them about upcoming events, updates with you and your work, exhibitions that are coming up, new releases of pieces, all that fun stuff that you want to make sure that your future collectors know about. Email newsletters are a great way to do that because, of course, there's so many ways to stay in contact with people these days through search engines, social media, handing out physical business cards, of course. If you do markets, you have the in-person events. But having the email newsletter is the best way to ensure that you turn that one-time interaction with the collector into a lifelong relationship, because you get to build up that relationship with the audience by communicating with them on a regular basis, giving them kind of the behind the scenes of what's going on in your studio, maybe a more personal side of what's going on as if they were in the studio with you with pictures and videos. And really that goal is to turn that one-time relationship of someone seeing you at a market, then they sign up for your email newsletter and suddenly they get to know you, they get to know your work on a regular basis. Especially with social media, which we'll dive into in a bit, that's often the main focus for many artists is sharing on social media, but really email newsletters are the way to go.
I completely agree, and there's data to back it up. You can go on a Google a Google search if you wanted to, and dive down that rabbit hole if you want to. But we'll just kind of share with you. Marketing researchers and experts have found out that email newsletters can be 40 times as effective as social media, because when you look at it this way, social media on average, your followers see about 2% of your posts, if that, right? On your email, however, if your open rate say hovers around 50%, that's a much higher engagement rate. 2% versus 50%. Yes, please. And of course, if you have a higher open rate, even better. Now, your numbers might not be the same, but that's okay, because when you think about it, there's a gap between your social media and your website and your email list. And that's the difference between talking to a crowd of people that may be interested in your work, right? Maybe, maybe not. They happen to encounter your stuff, as opposed to if you were to host a studio event in person where people signed up, they want to know more about you, they want to know about your art. I mean, that's a much more, if you will, curated list of persons that you're speaking to. So it's not just, off the roof of your, what is it, off screaming from the rooftops, like,
Yeah.
look at my art, you may love it, maybe, maybe not. Instead, the people that sign up to your newsletter are the people that are like, actually, I do want to know more. So you can be a lot more targeted in it.
Exactly. And that's what authors refer to as your warm market, right? It's not someone that just found you on Instagram, liked one picture, and then decided to follow you, or the algorithm put you in front of them and they really don't have any personal connection to who you are. Oftentimes, especially as you're first getting started, you get people on your newsletter list by those in-person events. So you already have talked to them. They've already seen your work in person potentially. You can, of course, gather emails online. But having that in-person interaction first is a great way to make sure also that your brand as a business and as an artist is aligned across the board. Because really, when it comes to the marketing strategy behind connecting with collectors and future collectors, you want to make sure that everything is in line, right? You want to make sure that what you present yourself as on social media is similar to your website, is similar to your newsletter, and also in person, because you don't want to have this jarring disconnect of what your life is like on your newsletter and then they meet you in person and it's totally different. Because one, I feel like that would be hard to do, but then also you want to build that trust, build that relationship, and kind of give people an insight into you and your work, which is ultimately the whole reason they would be following you.
I know. That makes me think of the whole like MySpace angles or whatever the kids call them these days of like if you make your pictures or the way you present yourself really, really say really curated
Oh
or
yeah.
like a lot of, you know, if it's a woman, maybe a lot of makeup, but then in person you look completely different. It just like forms
Right.
that jarring thing, or maybe it's you know, a dude, a masculine person, and they look like I don't know, like really aggressive, and then in person you
Mm,
go, "But you're the nicest person." I don't know. Make sure it's in alignment so whether they meet you online or in
mhm.
person, it's a similar experience.
Right.
Yeah.
And that goes in line too with just general branding and marketing
Mhm. Mhm.
of who are you? What is your work about? And what vibe and energy do you want people to leave in an interaction with you or
Mhm.
your work?
Exactly.
Which I know we dive into on other podcast episodes and it's a whole other rabbit hole. But a newsletter is part of that. You want to make sure that when you're building that relationship, it's in line with
The way
who
you
they
want to present.
see. Yeah, who they see when they show up to your booth at a market too.
Exactly, exactly. And obviously, as we're sharing all of this, like this doesn't just come from our recent experiences; it's also from our marketing backgrounds, which we did both have, which is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, we combine our superpowers. But essentially, it's like I chose to go to business school and do marketing instead of art. So there's that. Longer story for a different day. But that's when I first learned that marketing is just a tool. It's not this oh, I don't know, it's just about selling or things like that. No, it's just about telling your own story and knowing that as it relates to newsletters, you're allowing that person that's interested in, you know, in your art and wants to know more about you to actually invest in your story. More than just the art itself. Actually, sometimes I feel like people just want to be there to support you and cheerlead you and help you along on your art journey. Sometimes it's not even about the art itself.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I've learned too. Also, my day job is in digital marketing with a local company. And so, being a full time artist with a full time day job in digital marketing, that has definitely been one thing that I've learned working with other small business owners in a completely different industry has really helped change my perspective of marketing within the art world. Because when you really boil it down, of course, as the artists behind the pieces, we have an emotional connection to them. We have the magic experience of the creative process, but we sometimes can get so personally attached to the product itself that from a larger business umbrella standpoint, it can be hard to remove ourselves from the process. But realistically, it's a business first if you're trying to make money from it. And then the product that you're selling is the art. And just from a strictly business perspective, when you market the product more people see it, and therefore it is more successful. And so taking the artist's eye out of it, taking the meaning and the story out of it, marketing is such an important part of growing a business because honestly, I feel like 60, 70% of being a career-minded artist is focusing on the marketing side of it. We talk about that a lot on the
Mhm.
podcast and with other professional artists that we wish we could be just painting in the studio all day every day and that was our job, but realistically that is a big shift of turning a creative hobby into a creative business
Mhm.
is adding that business part of it, and that is the marketing side of it as well. Just like with any other small business, if they were to never talk about their business, never share it with the world, never share what products they have, how would you know they exist? And it's
Exactly.
the same thing for artists as well.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm glad you brought up those points because it's like if you're just working away in a basement and nobody knows you exist, you might have the best artwork in the whole wide world, but if
Right.
nobody knows about it, unless
Right.
they discover it after you're gone, maybe?
Yeah.
I don't
And
know.
that kind of ties back to a conversation we have often of, well, it depends on what your goals are,
And if you
right?
want to make money from it or not.
It depends on how you define success. And so if your goal metric for success is selling your work, then that path that you just gave the example of is probably not going to get you there. But if you're really focusing just on the creative process, producing work for yourself, that's amazing. You don't have to worry about
And
internet
actually
presence or newsletters or anything. But if your goal for success is to build a business,
mhm, mhm.
then a newsletter is a key part of that.
Well, and I was gonna say too, like, I would insert too that if maybe your goal is not to sell, but let's suppose that you do want recognition.
Yeah.
You would like your work to be in a museum someday and whatnot. It's actually not a waste of time to still do a
Yeah.
newsletter to create your own narrative about what your work is about, as opposed to trying to have others interpret or try to put the pieces together after the
Right.
fact of what you were trying to convey. Because as we know, the art doesn't speak for itself. So that's where
Absolutely.
that ties in. And that's too why, you'll hear us, harping on you need to do marketing. You need to market yourself as an artist. You need to tell other people about what you do. I mean, I know there's that stigma of like, you don't want to be a sellout and maybe you shouldn't and things like that. But realistically, it's like you said, if you want to make money for it, if you have a 9 to 5 that you'd rather not have, or you're bartending on the side, or whatever your other side gigs or day jobs are, and you want to make that shift, you have to market yourself just like anybody else would. And it's interesting because if you think about other professions, like they don't seem to have that icky kind of
Mm,
thing when they're talking about themselves. Like if an accountant's telling you about their services, you go, "Ooh, they're so silly." I mean, there is used car salespeople too. That I think that's what everybody thinks about. But like, say you have another artisan, right? Or another fine artist, actually any of the other ones, and they're just a potter, for example, and they're talking about their latest mug. You're not like, oh, it's so icky, they're all selly. You're like, no, it's a functional item and I love it and I'd like one.
mhm.
I'd like us to kind of think about that about our fine art as well. It is at the end of the day something that we create. We may have created it just for us, but if we're running this as a business,
Mhm.
it is intended to find a home for somebody else. So we have to market it, we have to
Yeah.
do that
And I
part.
think you touched on a key point too of marketing doesn't mean asking for the sale or being salesy, which
Mm-mm.
again goes back to how you define success. If you want to make sales, then great, you're going to have to ask for the sale eventually or have more curated content towards a product release, so to speak, or collection launch. But marketing can also be sharing your story, as you
Mhm,
mentioned,
mhm.
connecting with future collectors, connecting with curators, and really making sure that you are in ownership of your voice. Because, contrary to popular belief, as much as we would want our artwork to speak for itself, it doesn't always do that. And that's one thing that I, as an artist, find super empowering, honestly, because I love having with my work and for artists that I follow and I'm on the newsletters of, I love experiencing the work first, and then when you read about it or watch a video about it and learn more about the background behind the piece, the influences, the artists who made it, it adds a whole other layer and dimension to the piece itself. It's like reading the wall text at a museum. It's like looking at the brochure. But as artists in the modern age where we have email and technology, we can connect with people all over the world, we get to be in control of that narrative. We're not relying completely on galleries and museums to like have a curator be the voice of our work. We get to be
Mhm.
the voice of our work, which is super, super empowering. Can be a little intimidating for sure, but understanding that we get to put the message behind it. And so, especially thinking of from a reaching your audience standpoint, one thing that I found so interesting as someone who works in social media for my day job, and the ever evolving algorithms that everyone talks about, is that realization too that email is the only platform that hasn't changed in like over 20
Decades.
years.
Yeah.
Like algorithms and social media platforms are constantly changing. And how do you beat this algorithm? Or should I be on that platform? Should I be on this one? You have email, and all of the different email providers speak to each other. You can send an email from Gmail and it gets to Yahoo. It's like imagine if Instagram and well, I guess Instagram and TikTok relate to each other, but you get what I mean. Like it's always the same. You send someone an email, it shows up in their inbox. The only thing that's changed is there's like the potential spam filter.
Mhm,
But even
mhm.
that, we don't have to worry about it really much. And so the idea of keeping your content super simple, knowing that whoever's on your newsletter list will see it, and doing things like studio updates, blogs, events, exciting announcements in your business, and knowing that you own the audience, you own that list of emails. So even if the platform that you use to send emails were to somehow shut down, you still own your list of emails. It's different than social media to where you don't own your Instagram followers. And I think especially recently with TikTok on how there have been a few threats or conversations
Legal
about
hiccups.
TikTok shutting down or them banning it, like, unless you have that audience on another platform or on a newsletter list, then you don't have any way of saying, oh, well, if TikTok shuts down tomorrow, don't worry, I can email all of them and let them know where they can still stay in contact with me. Oh, I'm actually on this new platform. Like, email is that, like, you can rest assured knowing you own that email list.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
that's where the true value comes in.
Exactly. It's much like having your own website with your own URL. That will always still be your home base,
Right.
but people don't necessarily remember to go to your website to see what's new. Plus, depending how often you update it, websites can go obsolete a little bit faster. But that email is also what helps them like, hey, I'm still here. I still exist. You signed up because you like my work. Here's what's new, or here's what's happened, or here's a story from my childhood that ties into this latest piece, or I got accepted into the show. So it's like basically like that tap of like, "Hi, like, I'm
Right.
alive, I'm here." Um, whereas like we said earlier with social media, they may or may not see it. So
Right.
at least with the email, they have that option and they can go back and see the other ones you've sent them and kind of go from there.
Yeah.
So
That's another key thing too. Email is searchable. So
exactly.
even if they don't look at it in real time or say, what was that one artist who made the ceramic mugs? They can
That
go
had
into
a
their
bear,
email
yeah.
and search ceramic mugs. And every email that they were part of that said that. So if you featured a blog post about your latest ceramic mugs, it'll show up in their email and they can find you. If you find, I mean, I've done this a million times. I'm on Instagram. I was like, what was that one artist? She had that pink picture with that blue thing over here and she was posing next to it. How are you supposed to search that?
Thousands.
Like,
If you don't know their name, good luck.
right. And then you just have to, like, well, I guess I'm just gonna wait until the abyss of the scroll pops them back up on my feed and then I'm gonna remember.
And then maybe because it's an infinite scroll.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Right. So honestly, even that feature alone, the fact that emails are searchable is huge. Or who was the one person I saw at that market and they searched the market's name and then your email that you sent afterwards to everyone that showed up to your market. So great seeing everyone at the
Fill in the blank.
fill in the blank market. Boom. Now they can contact you. Now, 6 months from now, when they remember your piece that is still in their mind from that market, you can contact them. That alone, invaluable.
I know, I know. Well, so you might be wondering, okay, all right, fine, I'll do it. Where do I even start? And one thing that you'll hear us talk about is you need a system to make it way less overwhelming. You can create your own templates, things of that nature that just helps kind of
Mhm.
make it a little bit easier. So obviously, if you've heard our podcast before, you know that besides the podcast, we run the Level Up Artist business community. We definitely have full training on this with templates. We discuss different platform providers. We'll compare MailChimp against MailerLite and a whole bunch of other ones. Um, Things to look for, regardless of which provider we go for. And we definitely go into some pros and cons and some feature comparisons with them.
Yeah, and that's super helpful because we know we did that at the beginning of our creative journey. We're still always doing that. We know other artists are. And rather than going into the deep dive yourself of YouTube videos and blog forums and cross comparisons and wait, when was this made? 2019. Okay, half of these don't even exist
Yeah,
anymore.
yeah.
We said we've already done the deep dive, so let us share with you everything that we've figured out. And so, as Adriana said, that's in the Level Up Artist business community at levelupartist.com is where you can find more information on that. And the biggest thing I found helpful too, in addition to those platform comparisons, is also the roots for establishing your system. So, what is your workflow going to look like? What is your frequency of the newsletters that you're sending? What is the content structure going to be? So, how to identify like what's best for you? What's realistic and sustainable for you? And also, okay, you have your platform, you have your workflow. What the heck are you going to put in your newsletter, right? You sit down to write and you're looking at this blank page. So we include prompts, we include categories of everything that you can think of to really just get you started. Because as you mentioned, Adriana, getting started is often the hardest part. Once
Mhm.
you've done things in repetition, just like a new artist style, once you've done it a couple times, you have 2 or 3 paintings under your belt, 10, 15 paintings under your belt. It's just kind of a workflow that you know.
Mhm.
So we really want to do everything that we can over in the business community to lean on each other for support as fellow working artists, career minded artists, but also give you guys the tools that you need in order to set up those systems to make your future life easier,
Yeah.
because that's ultimately what it's all about.
Yeah, save you some valuable time, give you something to jump off from, and of
Mhm.
course you can customize it as much as you like. But yeah, that's where we create templates, comparisons, charts, videos. We have
Yeah.
all kinds of goodies in there. And
And it,
obviously not just about newsletters. We have it on all kinds of business topics. But if you are like, okay, let's take a step back. This is a lot to think about, especially as it relates to the newsletters itself, and you might be feeling a little apprehensive. Just a quick, little side note before we start wrapping up. For those of you that might be artroverted, where you're like, but I don't want to be bothering people. Just remember, like, this is something where the people that are signing up, they're there because they want to know about you. And as
Mhm.
an artroverted, you might not. And actually, for those of you that maybe in person it's a little bit of a struggle, then email newsletter is even better. You can say this in your own way. You can share what you're ready to share at your own pace, at your own frequency about your artwork, your process, your materials, anything you'd like, and just give that little extra tidbit to those folks that are reading your newsletter without feeling like, you're center stage and the lights are shining and you're like, oh my gosh, that's kind of scary. And just know, it may feel a little vulnerable at first, but much like many other things, that relate not just to artistic practice, but the business side. Um, I may feel a little bit like that at first, like recording a video, recording a podcast like we do. It just takes practice. And the same thing's going to happen with a newsletter. At first, it might feel like, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I have a typo? It just takes time. You just 1.0, 2.0, and you just keep iterating until you find your flow, your system, your rhythm, and you just roll with it.
Exactly. And that's really where the community support comes in handy too, because we've all been there. We've all sent our first newsletter. We've all made our first big mistake on there, but we've also had our first wins on there, sold a piece through our newsletter, gotten a curator to respond to a newsletter. And you're like, I didn't even know that they were actually looking at these. This is crazy and exciting. And they know who I am. Or have someone come up to them at a market being like, oh, I'm on your newsletter. And they start talking to you about these things that happened in your studio. And you're like, I really don't know who you are, but that's great. This is awesome. So that's part of it too, is finding the empowering voice within your newsletter and marketing in general, really, because you do get to curate and customize what you share. I think oftentimes there's this thought of, if you're whether more private or more introvert, that you have to share everything that goes on in your life, everything in your creative process. And some artists choose to do that, and that is great for them, but that is not needed from a marketing strategy. You get to show up authentically and reveal what you want to reveal. And that's the great part too about having a newsletter, is you get to plan that ahead. What do you want to feature? What do you want to highlight? And that's one thing we do in the Level Up Artist business community, is break down that marketing strategy of, okay, what is the goal behind this piece of content? What's your strategy of reverse engineering an exhibition that's coming up or a series that you're launching?
Mhm,
So that way
mhm.
you're also making sure that every piece of content has a goal,
Yeah.
which could be a totally other deep dive that we go into in the community. So if you're interested in that, go on over to levelupartist.com and you can sign up. A link for that will be in our show notes. You can join us on there with hours and hours of training, modules, PDF, templates, as well as weekly live calls with our community.
Yep. And when you sign up, you get access to all of it. So if you want to go down and like binge any of that content, it's there ready for it. But that's a wrap for today, because we can keep talking about email newsletters and mailing lists for a while. Obviously. Thank you so much, and we hope you enjoyed this episode.
As always, our blog will be linked in today's show notes, where you can find episode notes as well as link to the Level Up Artist business community.
And if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, definitely reach out. You can get a hold of us through social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artist on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.